Okay, guys, what we're going to try to do is have you work through this big picture review chart that you've been handed. Yours is blank, mine is not. And what I thought I would do is just kind of talk you through some of the stuff that I think you should be aware of as you study and move forward, preparing with the exam. We're going to do the first 2 rows today, and then we'll probably do 3 rows and then 3 rows to finish this out, since you've got 3 days. And so we'll just break this up over time so you're not writing the whole period. All right, so if we're going to look at the first period, we start here at 1877 to 1898. Remember, this is the Gilded Age. This is a time in America's history where there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of new stuff rolling out, but at the same time there's some real economic problems that exist here in the United States, and a lot of social problems that haven't been addressed either. So we're going to pick up with political developments first, and we'll notice here that we have this shift in focus from the issues of civil rights after Reconstruction. Remember, Reconstruction was supposed to solve all of the problems that existed in the South and leave an environment where both blacks and whites were on equal footing and everybody is a full contributor and participant in the political process. That doesn't happen. And we had said in class that essentially the North kind of gives up after the Compromise of 77. Remember the election of 1876, where you have Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. There's a lot contested, and essentially what happens is the Republicans win the election in the negotiation after the fact, but one of the things that they traded away was the end of Reconstruction. So Reconstruction is arguably incomplete here, even though there have been a lot of constitutional amendments to address the status of African Americans in the South. It doesn't seem to have made a lot of change. And kind of moving forward through this time period, the Democrats and the Republicans really are trying to figure out what they want to be about. So I have used this word realignment. Before the war it was about slavery. Now it seems to be kind of a mess here. Do we want to do civil service reform? What about the tariff? You've got all this stuff that they kind of argue back and forth over. Some of it we'll pick up further over in the chart. With social developments over here in this next column, we know that African Americans in the South gradually revert to pre-war status. Essentially, slavery is reimposed. You don't call it slavery. It's tenant farming, it's sharecropping, it's the crop leasing system that we've talked about in the past. But what you have is created an environment where essentially people are tied to the land, and they're forced to farm in kind of the same conditions. And while there is some improvement, saying that there's dramatic improvement for everybody is certainly overblown. And we could argue about this more over in the economic part too. You had black codes that were still in force at the end of the war. That shifts into Jim Crow laws, which give you sort of a framework, I guess, legally for discrimination and segregation. And that's going to essentially hang out until 1954. You have a number of court cases that are supposed to deal with this, and really, probably the biggest one that you need to know is Plessy versus Ferguson, 1898, which essentially signs off on the idea that separate but equal facilities is okay, that essentially segregation is legal. That'll be reversed certainly later with Brown versus Board, but that's kind of what you get. In other areas, you see other stuff happening. We had the social gospel movement, the idea, especially for middle class folks, especially as you get closer to the end of the 1800s, that if you wanted to improve your status with God, if you wanted to go to heaven, then the thing to do would be to intervene in low wealth areas where there are lots of immigrants and lots of poor people and try to help those folks out. So social gospel is the idea that middle class folks are supposed to help poor folks out. Settlement houses we talked about with Jane Addams and the Hull House and Walter Rauschenbusch and those kinds of guys. Essentially the path to heaven, if I'm a middle class person, it's going to be made by me being willing to help out other folks. Social Darwinism is the idea of survival of the fittest, that poor people are poor just simply because they're genetically inferior. These ideas kind of roll out together, and you have people who believe in both of them at the same time. So you have that. Remember, the Plains Indians are removed. The Homestead Act encouraged people to move west. The building a transcontinental railroad encouraged people to move west. Mining booms happen all over the West, and every time Plains Indians are pushed into smaller and smaller spots. You had the Dawes Act, which forced Native Americans onto reservations, and then shrunk the size of the reservations as the land was sold off. Economic developments that we have over here, we know that there's a lot of argument over the gold standard and bimetallism. Republicans, and to be honest, gold bug Democrats want to keep the gold standard and were against fiat currency like the greenbacks inherited from the Civil War, and they're against injections of large amounts of silver in the economy. That's what the populists had pushed for. Increasingly, everybody sold this idea that a protective tariff is a good idea. Protective tariff is a high tariff, and it goes up throughout the period, even though farmers and other folks don't want that to happen. You see these new robber barons appear, people like Carnegie and Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, new business structures. We saw trust, we saw vertical integration, horizontal integration. So that's really kind of done to make more money and also to improve efficiency in the market. You see working groups organize, that's labor unions. So whether we're talking about the Knights of Labor, the American Federation of Labor, the American Railway Union, the International Workers of the World, there's groups that have organized. Open range ranching, if you'll recall, was what sort of happened in the beginning, where cowboys rounded up all these longhorn cattle from Texas and then drove them to railheads, usually in Kansas, and then they were shipped to Chicago or New York to be slaughtered. The winter of 1887, 88, or 86, 87, I'm sorry, ends that. People then go to raising cattle on their own. Barbed wire matters. Bonanza farms are a short-lived attempt by railroads to do both the farming and the shipping, that they thought that would be more efficient. Foreign policy developments, there's not much here. You annex Alaska, manifest destiny, the idea that you can take the West. Plains Indian Wars, there's nothing here that you really need to know. As far as, hey, I'm moving around. As far as the next time period, 1898 to 1920, we have imperialism and progressivism. What you're going to see here is progressive reformers. All these guys are caught up in the social gospel movement here, plus the populists that you saw politically here are going to sort of distill down and have an impact on middle class folks here. So the progressive reformers, honestly, most of them are socialists. So you had Jacob Riis, you had Lincoln Steffens, you've got The Jungle that was written by Upton Sinclair. All those guys are muckrakers. They're social reformers. They want to see life improve for immigrants and for the working class. Middle class folks buy into it. Civil rights still is kind of a dead issue. You have that argument between Du Bois and Booker T. Washington over what to do and how best to integrate in society, and really they kind of straddle this time period as far as social developments and civil rights. Right, so to this middle column again, so social developments, we have social gospel and social Darwinism. They continue. Add in the temperance movement. Women's suffrage becomes big again, and we have, along again with this expansion and push for rights for African Americans, but again, that's within the African American community with Du Bois and Washington. Some social reforms get done, but really much innovation here to protect the working class is destroyed by the courts because they're really conservative. So the Sherman Antitrust Act, which is supposed to be over here to regulate business, is used honestly to suppress labor unions. So what you see here is some division about what to do with the working poor, or whether or not something needs to be done at all. And you also see this period of union, I guess, where America comes together to support these wars for empire. Spanish-American War obviously is the big deal here. You've got intervention in Mexico, and you'll have some other stuff too. But I should wait and talk about that over here in the foreign policy part. Big business and banks are going to be the entities that dominate the Gilded Age, and to be quite honest, they're really going to dominate this time period too. So There is some reform. Teddy Roosevelt with trust busting. We know Taft bust more trusts, and we know that Wilson will roll out the Federal Trade Commission to try to deal with that. You had the Sherman Antitrust Act, which really kind of rolls out on the back end of the Gilded Age, and that's going to be supplemented and strengthened with the Clayton Antitrust Act that happens here. We know that the federal income tax is going to happen for the first time. So there are some significant changes. Gold, which was the hot topic, you know, we had the bimetallism. Is this going to be a thing? Is it not going to be a thing? Essentially, the decision that comes out here is that gold is going to be your currency, and gold will be the standard until you get down to the Great Depression. Foreign policy, you have a lot happening here where you didn't have a lot in the last row. So America is going to fulfill Mahan's vision. Remember, Mahan wanted a modern navy. He wanted a canal to move that navy back and forth, and coaling stations around the world so that you could project power other places. So you're going to assert yourself as a policeman of the hemisphere. That's the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. You'll intervene south of the border if money is at stake. That's dollar diplomacy, and you do that in Haiti, you do it in the Dominican, you do it in Nicaragua, you do it in Mexico. There are a lot of different places where America inserts itself south of the border. Even the quote-unquote liberation of Panama and the building of the canal can be seen as that. So a lot happening in these first two periods, and hopefully you've got enough here to kind of flesh it out and remember what's going on. And we'll pick up with 1920 to 1928 in the next video.